Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Race Talks, Interdisciplinary Virtual Colloquium series at Texas A&M University, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I am Dr. Mariana Garriazzo, and today we are so excited to present an interview with the extraordinary stage manager, Narda E. Alcorn. And before we properly introduce our guest, and I pass the mic to my dear colleague, Professor Reina Dexter, I will tell you a little bit about this series. Race Talks is made possible by an Advanced Climate Together grant funded by the College of Liberal Arts. And this project joins really a national conversation on race that aims to invigorate campus-wide efforts on anti-racist advocacy through performance, research, and pedagogy. This diverse programming is a collaboration between 6 university units, including Africana Studies, the dance program, the film program, Latino and Mexican American Studies, Performance Studies, and Religious Studies. We are so deeply thankful to the staff in Performance Studies for making it all happen behind the scenes. Thank you so much to Myra, Darlene, and Kathy. We are nearing the end of this series as we've come to a close for this semester, with only one more event besides the interview today. So I invite you cordially to attend our last event next week. That will be a grand finale panel on anti-racist pedagogy, and we will have Professor Alcorn come back next week too. So please join us at 2 p.m. next Thursday, April 22nd. Students can earn maroon-based points for attending Race Talks, so you may want to explore the maroon-based application. I will copy and paste that information right here on the chat, and this is a program offered by the Office of Innovation. To all joining us today, I invite you to truly demonstrate the Aggie spirit that sets this community apart, and our core values of excellence, integrity, leadership, and respect inform all of our Race Talks events. All in attendance are expected to demonstrate these core values. It is the shared responsibility of all of us to embrace and support individuals from a variety, range of identities, perspectives, viewpoints, and experiences with full understanding and sensitivity. To promote a safe and inclusive Aggie community, we encourage you to report acts of hatred, discrimination, or bias toward members of the Aggie community using Stop Hate. The Office for Diversity also provides resources for self-care, addressing xenophobia and racism, and I will post here again the website in which where these resources are available. As always in Race Talk events, I will invite you to remain on mute to ensure the best quality of sound. We will have an interview today, so Professor Reina and Professor Alcorn will be chatting a bit. I know that you will truly enjoy the concepts in this conversation. We will invite you to post questions on the chat all the time throughout the event. We may bring those questions into the conversation and at all times. And also at the end of the event, there will be a voluntary survey for those in attendance, and I will share that link later on. And with that said, Professor Dexter, please take it away. Thank you.
All right, welcome everyone. I am so glad that you are here today, and welcome to Narda E. Alcorn. We are so pleased to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to tell you a little bit about her in case you don't know. Narda's pedagogy originates from the intersection of stage management theory with stage management practice. And in fact, in the fall, those of you who were enrolled in stage management and arts administration read the book that she co-authored with Lisa Porter as our textbook for that class. This approach can be a potent tool in the process of stage management, and especially when we're looking to create inclusive and safe environments in our production process. So as a professional stage manager, she has worked internationally, regionally, on Broadway, probably most notably as a stage manager who premiered 4 of August Wilson's plays and worked on 2 revivals of his works, as well as serving as a stage manager for Disney's The Lion King. So I'm sure that Narda will share some of that work with us. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for that beautiful introduction. It's lovely to be amongst your community. Once again, I am Professor Narda E. Alcorn. I use she, her pronouns. I am calling in today from the unceded lands of the Munsee Lenape folks, and I acknowledge them and honor their stewardship of this land, which I call the east side of Manhattan. And I'm ready for questions.
All right. Well, I was wondering if you could start us out with a little introduction about your career and what choices you made that got you to where you are now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I'll actually share with you, it was through my career that stage management theory and theory-guided practice was born. So I was very fortunate to attend the Yale School of Drama. I went from undergrad into the Yale School of Drama, specifically as a stage manager, and also specifically to meet August Wilson. I was fortunate to be young and in that atmosphere when he was still alive and working. I was very fortunate again at the end of my first year. I was introduced to August, and I was bold and courageous and told him that I wanted to work with him. I wanted to be a part of his work. His play, Fences, the original Fences with James Earl Jones, was my very first Broadway show. And so the impact of that, as being somebody who was primarily in white institutions, primarily in white academic institutions, to even know that this was a Black man who wrote about Black people in the most beautiful way was truly transformative to me. And so I had the introduction to August, and then literally from graduation, went right into my very first Broadway show, which was August Wilson's 7 Guitars. Mm-hmm. And what happened there, the wonderful way that August used to work on and premiere his shows, they would go from regional theater to regional theater. So for example, I've been at the Alley Theater, where I believe it was 7 Guitars actually, that was there. So, Boston's Huntington Theater, American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, La Jolla Playhouse, Center Theater Group in Los Angeles, the Alley, Dallas Theater Center. The list goes on and on. I think I've been in 16 or 17 regionals across the country. And so August's work would go from regional to regional, and he would, write and rewrite, and sometimes we would recast, until finally we would end up in New York City. And that process of going basically from regional theater to regional theater, I realized that, I was very fortunate because I had August's blessing. And so I was, instead of using whatever local stage manager was in town, I was able to be a part of that work. First as the assistant stage manager, and then as the lead stage manager. And I realized that as I would come in, essentially stage managers, we have about a week of what is called pre-production to truly to meet the organization, to learn the systems, to establish new systems, to truly demonstrate ourselves as leader, as collaborator, so that on that first day of rehearsal, we truly are emerging as a leader in this institution that we may never have even known about a week ago. So that I realized, even before I had language to know what I was doing, that I was I was thinking about what does this particular, what do I need to do specifically at the Huntington Theater in Boston in terms of, meeting that organization, in terms of, being a young stage manager, being a Black stage manager in a predominantly white institution. What do I need to do in order to build trust, in order to honestly demonstrate competence, and in order to show that I actually can lead this production forward? And so I was thinking about these again, qualities, principles, values, I now call them theories, that were sort of guiding how I was doing the work. And I ended up doing that through every phase of the production process. So I would think about that intently for pre-production. I would think about it for that first day of rehearsal, where you're truly, you're creating a community. So what does that practically mean? Everything from how is the room laid out, to how am I addressing the company? What words am I using? What do they see when they walk in the door? All of the ways in which we build community. And so looking at every phase of the process, and it wasn't until I'm going to say anywhere from 3 to 5 years of doing this, again, over and over again, from theater to theater, it was when I was back in New York, and I was actually off Broadway doing August Wilson's Jitney. Mm-hmm. And Thomas Kelly, who's written a very famous stage management book, who used to work at City Opera, his schedule at City Opera was too much. And so he'd gotten my name, and he said, "Hey, Narda, can you cover a few classes for me?" And I was like, "Sure, I'd love to cover a few classes for you." And through that process, I ended up becoming first covering a few classes, and then actually having a semester-long stage management class. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I got word that I would be teaching, for a full semester, that I thought about, well, how am I gonna teach? Like, what am I gonna teach them, in terms of that? And so I went back to, well, what do I do? And that's where I realized it's all about theory. I think about the different phases, which I break down into 9 phases of the production process. I think about the theories that are guiding me, again, depending on who and what and why and where, and then that actually guides my practice. And so that is essentially how stage management theory was born. And I still, to this day, use that process. I am very privileged. If the world makes it so, I will be the production stage manager of Shakespeare in the Park this summer. And even now, again, when you think about what is the most important thing that this company will need coming back to work in person, they're going to need to feel safe. Yes. And what does that mean? And so that's a theory, of course, that is guiding us. I, of course, have adopted anti-racism, as a theory. This is going to be an all Black and African cast in a predominantly white institution. And so again, thinking about past harms, thinking about what can I do, and what can I encourage along with my colleagues and partners to do so that this cast doesn't feel tokenized, feels absolutely a part of the organization, and where we can truly reduce, the unfortunate microaggressions that tend to happen, and really, and also provide a way to address that harm if it does happen. So actually talk about some of these things in advance. And that's part of the anti-racist practice that I'm now developing as well. So in a nutshell, so the one thing I left out of there is, again, a lot of August Wilson. Was very fortunate to land my first teaching gig at Purchase, where I was there for 11 years. Also in there, I landed The Lion King on Broadway, and was also with The Lion King as one of their stage managers for about 11 years as well. My teaching career, when I started Family, it seemed really wonderful to actually just spend some time just really focusing on my teaching. And I went over to the theater school at DePaul University in Chicago. I was fortunate enough to actually take over the program that I graduated from for about 5 years, was then recruited back to New York by NYU, which began a stage management track specifically. So I was their very first head of stage management. And I would have loved to have had a longer time at Tisch NYU. But the person who was at the Yale School of Drama retired, and and I think that always for me, that was my dream job, to go back to my alma mater, and again, very privileged to be the chair of the stage management department. So I think in a nutshell, that is my career.
That's wonderful. That's a great overview. Thank you. I'm coming back to thinking about your work, your upcoming work with the public, with Shakespeare in the Park this summer, and wondering what strategies and theories that you've been developing over the last few years are you specifically taking into this work that you're doing right now?
Thank you for that question. I am, interestingly, I just interviewed about 7 young stage managers to be production assistants on this project. And it was one of the most perhaps transparent and vulnerable interview processes that I've had ever, because I asked questions that I've never asked before in an interview process. Asking a young, 20-something, what does anti-racism mean to you? How have you changed not only during the crisis, but during the racial reckoning that has really affected the American theater? So specifically to your question, I believe that there are intentional, inclusive practices that everyone, and specifically stage managers, can bring to our work. And in many ways, it's not necessarily that we're doing more things, it's actually that we're doing a lot of things differently. Mm-hmm. And so specifically in regards to language, for example, one of the first things that I spoke to the theater about, what's wonderful, again, many theaters are doing this, many institutions are doing this, they're offering what is often called COVID compliance officer training, again, like CCO training. The information is fantastic. I reject the fact that that position is called an officer. Because again, think about the history of policing in our country, specifically now. And so why can't this person be a manager? Or COVID compliance manager, or a health and safety manager? So we've actually changed the name of that team. And that in and of itself, especially again, because the lens of anti-racism tells me that most of the people on the COVID compliance team will be either white or white appearing. And again, I have an all Black and African cast. And these are the folks who are in a sense going to be responsible for making sure that everybody's, following the rules. And all of a sudden that dynamic is can be tense. Mm-hmm. And so that's a way for me, in terms of when you think about, again, putting on the lens of anti-racism and thinking about our history. I think it's so important to have an understanding of American history and how this country has treated certainly underrepresented groups, many underrepresented groups. And that will, I think, give insight into why it's important to have care around, who are your managers in the room? Let's call them managers. And also then, and how are they going to interrupt or gently encourage folks to follow those guidelines. So language is a big deal for me. Everything from obviously really thinking about any sort of policing language, taking that out of the role of the stage manager, of any manager. For me personally, I have been working on what I would call, I use the term gun language, but and I'm going to say a few phrases so folks understand what I mean. For example, I'm under the gun, or let's pull the trigger on this. I've really tried to eliminate gun language from my vocabulary. And then also, of course, in the theater, we have a lot of phrases that have been extremely problematic. We all know that in the theater, soft goods have often been called Blacks. It's very common to say, let's hang the Blacks. That's a loaded phrase when you have an all Black cast. So again, it's just about being mindful. And I would say that there are a lot of young people, I think all young people, and especially young white people who aren't aware of some of the of essentially of the history. I recently spoke to a wonderful young white male production manager who was referring to one of our Black cast members, who's also male, as my boy. And again, in the most loving way possible. I mean, really, you know, in just an endearing way, and did not understand the connotation of that, did not understand the connotation of what does it mean for a white man to refer to a Black man as a boy. So language is huge, and it is of course imperfect, and it is fluid, it is ever changing, especially as we know in the academy. And so having grace and generosity around language, having conversation around language, I think is really important. One of the practices will be to actually talk to the company about language and about how we hope to be inclusive, and that these are phrases that we hope that the company doesn't use, and also that we are so human, and that we're gonna mess up, we're gonna make a mistake, and that we just as we hope to be met with generosity when we make a mistake, we will of course meet others with generosity. So, and even having that conversation, I mean, imagine having that conversation at the top of a rehearsal process. I have never had that conversation at the top of a rehearsal process. I am so excited about that. I am so excited about opening that conversation. So around language, that is a new practice of mine, building what's called community agreements or company agreements. Many of us now have this in our classrooms. And essentially these are agreements of how we will be in relationship with each other. And it can be as simple as all truths are valid. You know, we understand that, you know, we each have a different truth, and they're all valid. It can be as simple as each of us individually, we agree to address and to accept the responsibility of our impact, regardless of our intent. Again, many of us are very well-meaning, and even as well-meaning as we are, we're going to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. You know, so having some community, the agreement of we will take the time to address harm when it happens. I mean, that's huge, I think, especially for anybody socialized and raised in the United States. I will speak for myself. I was raised to, you sort of, you know, you grin and bear it. You put your sort of big boy, very gendered language. So you put your big pants on, and you just sort of move through it. That sort of rugged individualism, and that's oppressive, you know. And we need to no longer do things the way that we used to, and we need to truly interrogate, you know, of course, our systems and our structures and how we are in relationship with each other. So again, and all of this is to say, the practices that I hope to bring with me to every production going forward, none of this is going to prevent or eliminate harm without question. But what the hope, the goal is that all of the slights, all of the microaggressions, all of the harms, all of the times that people have felt either misunderstood or not heard or not included, in many a profession, not just the theater, but typically, certainly even in the academy, it goes unspoken. And so essentially, I believe in terms of promoting equity and inclusion, we are now at a time where we can say, actually, we're now going to talk about all of that. We're now actually going to take the time, and we're going to talk about all of that. And so that is, for me, that is the hope going forward, especially into this production.
Thank you. Yes, that's wonderful. I think yesterday we talked to our students also about that idea of vulnerability and understanding intent versus impact, and really making room for us all to understand not if we make a mistake, but when we make a mistake. I remember you said that, and that really stuck with me from our conversation yesterday. Can you talk a little bit about how you make room for yourself to learn and to grow while simultaneously being a leader in these spaces, whether that's your classroom or a rehearsal room. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's so important. Continuous self-education. And I will admit, I think for many of us, certainly a year plus ago, at the height, specifically in New York City, at the height of the crisis, where we were truly, or I'll speak for myself, I was truly in my home, not leaving. A lot of reading, a lot of attending, trainings and groups, and a lot of self-education. I do feel in many ways, sort of last summer into the fall and winter, certainly, and even into the spring, that I went back to school, quite honestly. I mean, I also went back to school to learn how to teach on Zoom, So I think many of us did a lot of self-educating. And I think that can come in many ways. I think, again, it's reading books, and it's I think a lot of it is a self-reflection, really understanding our social locations, and then being able to understand then what does that mean for who we are in different spaces, because we're going to bring all of that into the room, whether we like it or not. So understanding our social locations, reading, really understanding the history of this country, regardless of if we were born in this country, but specifically if we're going to be here, we need to know, understanding different concepts in terms of anti-Blackness or racist or racism, all of those things, having a really strong analysis around that. So again, I did a lot of self-educating, and then with school and life and family as it happens, I realized actually just a few weeks ago, I just remember thinking, when was the last time I continued my self-education journey? It had been a while. And honestly, just recently, specifically at the beginning of April, I recommitted to my study, and for me, specifically, the way that I think about it is I want to have a strong understanding, a strong analysis of a strong point of view of what anti-racism means to me, of what it means to show up in a space, of who I want to be going forward. And so I have, and specifically for me, the study of language has been something that I am now continuing to do. And honestly, it's, I am blessed with a family, and I sometimes wait for everybody to go to bed. And I sometimes do most of my education from midnight to 1 a.m. So, you have to pick and choose as to where this time happens. And so for me, it's to write helps to solidify for me ideas and thoughts. And like many of us, I am someone who will read many different sources, and then obviously, compile my own analysis. So I've just recently really started thinking about how language, not only spoken, but what about the language on all of the paperwork that stage managers produce? And so I'm currently thinking about what would perhaps stage managers, typically we get sort of a main calendar from production or from the production management office, and then we turn that into our calendar, our show calendar for the entire year. And I thought, what would an anti-racist calendar look like? Like, what is that? So I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about typically stage managers might do either a welcome letter or a welcome email to the company. How can we make that anti-racist? What does that look like? So that's currently what I'm sort of playing with and thinking about, and it's I think there's so many opportunities. There's so many opportunities to be inclusive, and that's ultimately what we want. We want to be able to. We talk about this in the book. My co-writer and I, Lisa Porter, in terms of environment, we are uniquely suited and placed in the production process to truly create environment. And so to create an environment where everybody feels like they can be their authentic self is wonderful. So currently my scholarship and my education is about language, and I'm specifically focusing on all of the paperwork, from rehearsal report to contact sheet. I'm now putting pronouns on contact sheets. That was never my practice before. I'm now doing that. Now in a welcome letter, for example, if I introduce my assistants, I'm saying, they're writing their name and their pronouns. Thinking about, of course, inclusive language, naming. I've made a distinction between that I am able to cultivate and create a brave space, not necessarily a safe space. So I've actually changed that language for myself. For me, I believe that a brave space is where everyone in that space, and of course, especially the performers, are brave enough to be able to take risks and also to take responsibility for their own safety. And that means speaking up, of course. So I've changed that analysis. So that's where I am with my self-education.
Yeah. Wow, that's really great. I love that brave space. I think we hear the term safe space a lot, but for so many of us, acting in a vulnerable way, being vulnerable is not safe. It's quite risky. So I think that's a really wonderful way to reframe that environment. Thank you. I was thinking about our conversation yesterday and how stage managers, but really anyone, can address harm that they see happen. And what are some of these strategies that you use or you recommend for when you do either have someone say something to you that's harmful, or maybe you witness an interaction that's potentially harmful?
Thank you for that question. That is the question of the moment, I find, as I continue to visit classrooms myself with Lisa. I believe that going forward in all spaces, I hope to have the point of view that everybody honestly is excellent, and everybody wants nothing but the best for all of us. That we're not working with folks who want to intentionally hurt us, essentially is what I'm saying. So I do choose to have that point of view. And so then therefore going forward, when either, again, I witness a microaggression or it's towards me, I think the first thing I always want to do is for myself, and I typically do this internally, is like try to recognize the harm, like what just happened there? Did that statement alienate? Did that statement exclude? Did that statement diminish? Was it aggressive? Was it aggressive because of race, because of gender, so I tried to actually truly recognize and understand what perhaps the aggression caused. And again, that's my own internal work. And then I really typically, not always, but typically, especially if the room is such where it's a moment that passes, as many of these moments are, I think it's really important to find a time, and I typically will do this privately, because a value around this work is we should never shame when we are offering up, when we are offering up to interrupt aggression. I think in many ways, if we shame someone, especially if we do it publicly, we are also causing harm. So ideally, we're not going to do it publicly. So that's the first thing. So then it's taking somebody aside, and it's always using, of course, I statements. I observed when you said this, that that person seemed to shrink from you. I think that you diminished them. I observed when you said this, that this person was offended. I think that this, that this statement made them feel X, Y, and Z. And again, it's all I statements, because none of we like to think that we're objective. We are not objective. We are subjective people. So it's about using I statements, and then hearing from them. How did you feel about that moment? Or and that's where it can go 1,000 different ways. But essentially, especially if you were talking about something that you observed, I think it's important to use I statements depending on your positional power in terms of, are you the stage manager? Are you the assistant stage manager? Are you an actor? Is the person who you are talking to, do they have more positional power than you? Are they higher up in terms of hierarchy? That will depend on how you, if I'm the stage manager, I can say, in this process, we have prioritized that we will not be racist. And so I would really love for you to be much more mindful, and I encourage you to apologize. So that might be something I would do if I were a stage manager. Again, all of this is privately. And this is also too, before I would then go to the person who was harmed. Because we have to, the thing that I want to say, and I'm specifically talking to my white colleagues, is regardless of if you are not the person who received specifically racial aggression, I hope that we are all bothered and offended by racial aggression, not just the person, not just the BIPOC person. And so again, you're never speaking on behalf of somebody, you're always speaking for yourself. I would rather not be in a room where racist remarks are being spoken. I would appreciate it if you don't use that language anymore. I was offended by that. So all of that is I think where we want to be. But essentially, again, recognize the harm. Try for myself, I try to understand what happened in terms of really breaking it down in terms of analysis. And then again, depending on what it is, do I take the person aside? Do I take the person aside immediately? Do I take the person aside at the end of the rehearsal? All of that is do I write an email? I was on a call where a person, this was literally a day after the horrible, one of the horrible shootings had occurred. And there was a colleague who 3 times used, and I'm about to say gun language, used phrases such as, take me out and shoot me, under the gun, and phrases such as that. And I could feel the room each time do that. And this is a colleague who's been in the academy for probably 50 years, and no, in no way intended to offend. And it was a lot of young students, none of whom I felt, again, this is my analysis, I don't feel like any of them felt like they had the agency to say anything. And so for that, I wrote an email, so I think that there's 1,000 different ways of how we can interrupt. I think it depends on the relationship. I think it depends on the timing. I think it depends on the venue. But my principles are to recognize it, never ever to shame, always to speak only on my behalf. And then in that too, you're recognizing the power dynamics, and that will help, because sometimes you need to bring in an ally. Sometimes it's such, especially if you feel like you don't have agency or authority, that's when you want to go to an ally who perhaps has a little bit more positional power and have them help. So those are some ways to navigate that. It's tricky, and it can be learned. I've learned all of this. A year ago, I would have never been able to say any of this. So you can learn this, and it's practice. I actually have my students practice some of these phrases. practice speaking in I statements. Yes.
Thank you so much. I think that gives us a lot to consider. And I also think it's very encouraging when we hear people say, this is learned. It's a practice, not that you have to be inherently good at something, but like all of the things that we're learning in the academy, in your college classes, it's something we learn over time and with practice. I noticed we have a few questions in the chat, so I thought I would address those before we move on. Emily says, this is amazing. Truly grateful for this talk, especially everything you've said about language. As a company manager who spent several years on the Lion King tour, the significance of having an all-white management team with a predominantly Black cast did not go unnoticed and carried tremendous weight. Can you speak to the importance of having representation on a management team that reflects the company with which you are working?
Without question. Thank you so much for that question. I love that a fellow Lion King person. That's wonderful. Representation matters. That's just, for me, that's fact. Representation will always matter, and not just in terms of racially, ethnically, obviously gender. So without question, that's important, especially when we can see ourselves in all of the different roles. And there is no question that, especially in regards to, because we as stage managers, specifically as company managers, it is our responsibility to monitor, to uphold, to enforce many guidelines. That is part of what our responsibility is. And again, think about that sort of manager supervisor role. I believe, if you think about sort of our first big corporations, perhaps, plantations, and overseers, and just that analysis of what that position of manager means, and how so many of those, what I would call sort of supremacist characteristics like perfectionism and sense of urgency and individualism and binary thinking, how that is so much a part of that management role. So to me, that's even more reason why it's important to have representation in all aspects. Not to say, and I think it's really important for me to say, I was socialized in America. I absolutely have internalized racism. I absolutely carry supremacist characteristics. I have had to now unlearn that. So regardless of the fact of being Black, I think that this is something that we can all carry, and I think that that's really important. And there's no question that when I was on Lion King, many people felt more comfortable coming to me than my white counterpoints. And that's just like for myself, I prefer to have a doctor who identifies as being a woman or woman X. That's really important to me. So I think that representation matters, and I don't think that. I think we're in an interesting, perhaps dangerous time. We've been here for a while though, because tokenism is also real. And the language that we use around bringing new people in is really important. And it's interesting that when we hire white or white presenting folks, we often talk about their experience or their education or their amazing skills. But when we hire, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, we're very proud that they are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And I just think that we as a theater community certainly are in the middle of that. And I think that there can be a lot of backlash about that as well. And I think we have to do a better job about how we speak about, because race is always at play. Race has always mattered. Every time a white person has been hired, absolutely their whiteness has been a factor, just as when a Black person has been hired. and yet we don't speak of it in that way. So I think that representation matters, and I think that regardless of one's racial or ethnic identity, it is really important to still practice anti-racism. Yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Thank you. We have a few other questions. Francesca asks, when you were telling the story about the email that you sent to your colleague using gun language, she was curious how that person responded to your email.
You know, I must say they responded beautifully in terms of, they said, oh yes, absolutely, thank you. I don't, and this is my own, I think this is my own bias against age. I feel like they let themselves off the hook a little bit, because I think they said, I've been doing this for so long, I can't possibly, correct it after this long, but thank you so much. And that's not true. And again, this is not a close colleague. If this were a close colleague, I would there would be further conversation. But I felt like I did what I needed to do in order to remain in alignment with my own integrity, certainly. I do feel like they let themselves off the hook a little bit. And they also, they were very grateful. They said thank you. And hopefully they'll go forward and be more mindful.
Yeah, hopefully, you always have to hope that just bringing it to their attention, even if there's not that immediate change, you've planted a seed, something to think about as they move forward. All right, let's see what else we have here. As stories are being displayed on television and on stage, how do you display the truth, especially of someone's story, keeping it authentic and not being swayed by ideas that prefer not to share certain truths? Should we ask for clarification?
Yes, I apologize. I don't think
Siobhan, if you would like to unmute maybe and give us some context.
Yes, I'm sorry. So while you were speaking somehow, and I don't know if this question is appropriate, but I have enjoyed your presentation thus far. And if it's not meant for you, you could also explain that as well. So the context in which I'm thinking of specifically, like recently we had Billie Hadaway's story being displayed in film. And I got to, by interviews that they did with the main actor and of course the producer, and I know that this is television and you more deal with stage plays, but I would still like to get your input. One of the situations that arose was this story has been told already on film. However, it was told from a particular view. And you're having a lot of stories that are being recreated on a lot of icons. And now you're getting a totally different picture of that individual. Certain truths were told, particularly on that individual story, that was left out when it was originally displayed on television. So when you have that sort of interaction where you could see that producers are being led to leave out certain truths about people's stories, especially an autobiography of somebody's story, how do you stand your ground? Do you stand your ground? Because at the end of the day, you have to make a living. You want this to make, for some people, they want this to get all the accolades that it could possibly get. Or is it more important to tell the truth?
Thank you for, I understand. And again, I of course have to preface, I do not work in film or television. Also, I am, my artistry is around stage management as opposed to writing or directing or acting. So that's also quite different, or even producing. And I do have a point of view, and my point of view would be, I believe in, honestly, I believe in holding multiple truths. I think that more than one thing can be true at the same time. I think that in our current, the way that we produce art at this time, often it's maybe the producer or maybe it's the director, but there is a hierarchy. And if that person or persons is going to choose to perhaps leave out something that you as I don't know, writer, actor, whomever, think is really important. I think hopefully you feel like you have the agency to speak up. Absolutely. But again, in the world of how we create art in this country, there are folks who are decision makers and there are folks that are not. And so then I think you have to then choose, I'm going to stay with this project or I'm not going to stay with this project. In the theater world right now, I am somebody who has, I don't know if you all are familiar with the recent articles that have come out about the producer, Scott Rudin. I am somebody who has worked on Scott Rudin plays. I have lots of friends who are involved in To Kill a Mockingbird and Book of Mormon, much of the work that he produces. I want them all to have jobs, and you have to reckon with that. So I thank you for that question. I think that it's a personal choice, and I think that currently the way that we produce art in this country, it is a hierarchical system, and there are folks who make the decisions and folks that don't.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective and being authentic in your response. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you, Narda, for sharing your point of view. As we are starting to come to the end of our time, I thought an important question would be for those of us who are looking to dive in deeper with some of these topics. Do you have resources that you recommend?
Sure. I mean, there's so many, and I'm a huge student of Dr. Ibram Kendi, and I would say if you have not read How to Be an Anti-Racist, I think that can be in many ways foundational, especially in terms of really understanding a significant amount of history in this country, as well as really forming an analysis around race and racism and anti-racism. So I find that to be, for me, a really important piece of work. I think there's a lot of organizations that are doing amazing work. Art Equity is a wonderful organization. They specifically deal with arts and arts organizations, specifically in regards to trainings, and making sure that we have a fluency with this work. There's so many books. I also there's a book by Adrienne Marie Brown called Emergent Strategy. You wouldn't necessarily think that this is perhaps an anti-racist book, but actually it's revolutionary. I would say thank you, Mariana. Obviously, myself with my co-writer wrote a wonderful article for HowlRound. HowlRound, if you don't know that resource, is a wonderful resource. They actually have an anti-racism tab that you can go to. I believe the American Theater magazine may also have perhaps an anti-racism tab or a tab about race. So specifically in regards to the theater and all of the conversations regarding race. If you have not read the We See You White American Theater, the original letter, of course, the demands, and then the most recent response, that I think is a must read in terms of specifically in regards to where we are with the American theater and this work. So there's so much to so much to read and to take in. I think, and I would say too that I'm a big believer in saying, I typically say this to young people, but certainly for all of us, I just believe in starting. Like just do something. I mean, we're, especially for those of us who are professors, we know how to generate work. We know how to study, and I think that whether it's small steps, and then I would have never thought that from the tragedy the murder of George Floyd until now, I feel like I've learned in many ways sort of more in this, year and a quarter. It feels like grad school all over again. And I think that we can all do that. And what's exciting for me is I'm still learning. And there's no destination for this work. And it's an amazing time, I think, to be alive in the American theater. Never before has the American theater been as ready to have these conversations. And that is unbelievable. I would have never, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, not in my lifetime, So that's exciting for me.
Thank you so much. Those are wonderful recommendations. For those of us who are affiliated with Texas A&M, I did want to point out that Narda's book is available through our university library as an ebook, so you can read it online. And also Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. We're using that as a textbook in Aesthetics of Activism this semester in my class. So that is also an ebook. So you have free access to both of those resources to at least get you started. Narda, what else do we need to know? What didn't we talk about that we should have talked about?
Oh my goodness.
All the things.
All the things. I think the one thing that I have not put enough focus on is the fact that this is really difficult. And again, going back to I statements, I was, born and raised in Los Angeles, and also I've spent time in foster care world, and where often the foster care was given by white foster parents to Black children. That was a thing in the 70s. And I was told and taught, as many of us were, to not talk about race. And so I just want to say that the care and the generosity that I think we need to have around these conversations is just really real. Specifically the grace, because it's jarring to go from, wait a minute, you want me to name race? You want me to say it out loud to whereas before it's like it wasn't polite. You don't do that. And so I just think that we all need to understand that this is a change, acknowledge that, understand that it's really hard, it's incredibly vulnerable. And I think to also understand that this work is different for each of us. Speaking for myself, I must do this work. This is about my own liberation, and for others, and specifically, I'm thinking of a white ally and a white colleague. The work is important, but the work is not as personal for them, so I think that we have to understand that, and that hopefully will help us in terms of the care that we have when we have these conversations regarding who we're having those conversations with, because this is not work that I can really dig into in the office and then go home and forget about it. For some of us, this is our lives, and I just think that analysis and that understanding is really important.
Yes, thank you. It's important for all of us to remember. Are there other questions that we missed? I didn't see any others in the chat. So while we're checking that out, I'll just remind all of our participants to please take the survey. Dr. Gariazzo has pasted the link in the chat so that we can all give our assessment and give great feedback for this wonderful series that we've been privileged to host. Yes, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say I do have a lot more questions, but what we don't have is more time. So I thank you so much for both of you. Thank you, Reina, for moderating this event. Professor Alcorn, it has been such an honor to have you today, and thank you so much for sharing your methodology. In each one of your recommendations, there was a kind of list of this is how we can do this, right? And so I really appreciate your practical approach to these very, very difficult topics, and also this generosity of letting us all be vulnerable together, and knowing that perfectionism is not the goal, but rather being generous about learning together as a community, and allow us to really make a change that way with such a grace. So I have learned so much from listening to you yesterday and today. I will carry that for many, many years. And so I thank you. Thank you. This was extremely helpful for all of us.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been truly a pleasure to be amongst your community. So I appreciate that.
And thank you all for attending today. And
yes, thank you for the love in the chat. That's very generous. Thank you for that.
And we'll see you next week.
Yep. Yes. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to run because I actually have to teach a class.
Enjoy. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.